Shalom and welcome to Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Today we're looking at Genesis chapter 47, 31 verses. Throughout this chapter, the word corn is used, although we understand that to mean barley. We better understand that to be translated as barley, since corn did not exist in that time, in that place. In the Masoretic text, it calls this word or replaces the word corn with bread. Now, throughout this section, there aren't too many differences, only four significant differences. Beginning in verse 21, we see that Joseph brought the people, the Egyptian people, into bondage to him for servants from one extremity of Egypt to the other. So this isn't, have to make a disclaimer, this isn't the slavery of how we know it in our modern age, where people are involuntarily stolen from their peaceful livelihood, and against their will and forced to work for free. That isn't what Joseph did. These are people who have reached a point of desperation in their lives. They have nothing to offer, no possessions, no money, besides their own servitude. So they've become voluntary servants, indentured servants, and they're going to work in order to survive, to pay for their food that they're being given. They will work for it. And essentially that's what we do today. We work to make a living. So in a way, we're all kind of indentured slaves or servants by the biblical definition. So that's what's happening here. In verse 21, versus the Masoretic, it doesn't say this at all. It says the people, the Egyptian people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end thereof. It sounds like he just moved a bunch of people from one end of the country to the other end, and there's no reason given. It just sounds so superfluous. It's just, let's just do it because we feel like it. There's no reason given. Whereas the Septuagint tells us these people sold themselves as servants, and that gives us a better sense of why they did it, why these people moved from one end to the other. They weren't simply moved just because, but they were moved because they wanted to be servants. They wanted to work for the food that they were given or they were going to receive. In verse 23, we see a small difference here. It says the Egyptians. In verse 23, Joseph said to all the Egyptians, versus the Masoretic says here, Joseph said to the people. So because it says people, that can mean so many different things. It could mean people from another country, but here in the Septuagint it does say Egyptians, and that's very important because if it's not specific, we can make all kinds of assumptions. But because it does say Egyptians, we know what they're talking about here. It's not open to interpretation. It's Egyptians and no other people. I want to also point out that notice in verse 23, or actually earlier in the chapter, the people asked Joseph, they requested specifically for seed. They asked him, give us seed. We need seed so we can plant food and we can stay alive. And in this verse 23, he gave them seed. And in both versions, it says exactly that. So notice when people have a valid concern, a concern that relates to their well-being, their livelihood, their survival, essential survival, a good overseer, a good ruler will provide for their people's needs, but and in this case, specific requests. And in this narrative, it's seed. Notice in governments of our day, people ask for basic necessities of life, and some governments will just not provide it. They aren't godly governments or not righteous governments. Joseph is executing righteousness. He is treating his people with dignity and ruling them according to not just the laws of Egypt, but also the Torah as well, showing compassion on them and giving them what they want, what they need actually. Okay, continuing on, we see here in verse 29, this is Jacob speaking to his son, Joseph. He's commanding him, you shall execute mercy. You shall. It's not an option. He's commanding him, you shall execute mercy and truth toward me, so as not to bury me in Egypt. He's telling him this as a command. It's not like a friend or like an equal. He's telling him as a father to a son. In the Masoretic text, we don't get that feel at all. He says, I pray you. So he's like pleading with his son. I pray you, your hand under my thigh. It says that in both versions, hand under the thigh. That's a cultural thing they did. And I explained this earlier in one of my previous videos. I think it's with Abraham regarding finding a wife for Isaac. And he says, deal kindly and truly with me. So very similar to mercy and truth. But he says, bear me not, I pray you, in Egypt. So he's pleading with his son. That's not a command. So we're not getting the sense that he's a superior over Joseph. We're getting a sense that he's almost subservient to Joseph. And he's at the very least equal, but at the worst subservient. And that doesn't make sense, especially in this culture where they're commanded to honor their parents. Essentially, not saying that this is true, but they're in the place of Elohim essentially, in a kind of physical way. So that's verse 29, and then verse 31 says here that Israel did reverence, leaning on the top of his staff. So you can tell he's an older man, but he still bows to who? To his son. He bowed to Joseph. Reverence. This is a fulfillment of the dream that Joseph had, where he said not only did his brothers bow down to him, but even his own father. And his father bows down to his son. That's unheard of, but he did that. Maybe he remembered the dream, because it said when Joseph told him the dream, he kept it in his heart. He observed the saying and he fulfilled it. Maybe he kept that in mind and he said, I'm going to fulfill this because now there's a reason to. He's not just my son. He's a ruler of Egypt. He's the guy over all of this country, this superpower of the planet Earth. But in the Masoretic, we don't get this, that he revered him. It just says Israel bowed himself upon what? Upon the bed's head. It just sounds like he died. It sounds like he's sick and he's just bowing his head so he can sleep. That's not what he did. The Septuagint is explicit. It says he did reverence to Joseph, because he's only talking to Joseph. It's him and Joseph in this intimate moment having this private conversation. It says he leaned on the top of his staff because he couldn't bow down all the way to the earth. So he just did what he could with whatever physical capabilities he had, his physical limitations. So that's all I have to say about this chapter. Thank you for your time. Jehovah bless you and make your way prosperous. This is Jack Knight signing off for Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Shalom.